Right folks, you're listening to Count Richard von Cooden of Clergy. Today cruising with the Count I have Creda of Saints and Scholars, who had your channel got nuked, didn't it?
Well, it was nuked for a short time.
Right.
Way back, we put out a cheeky video on YouTube.
Right.
YouTube took us down, and but we appealed it after about a year.
Right.
So we got it back, but it was a bit of a spicy one. It was don't know if you remember the crack that was going on during COVID when they had the Eid festival. So
okay.
We kind of made a lampoon of that, and then of course the powers that be didn't like it.
Right. Just if I may, to slightly interject there, regarding certain things that you put into your arm, unfortunately, that seems to upset people. So I've come up with the idea of people taking a bowl of soup.
Oh yes,
okay.
Taking the soup.
So
yeah.
people taking their government recommended soup and the reactions to the government recommended soup, if that's okay, just in case it comes up in conversation.
Sure.
Because I did a very nice video with Dr. Jerry Waters, and I forgot to mention him. I was in awe of seeing his 6.9 litre Bentley Continental, that I forgot to remind him to use the word soup. So as soon as he got stuck into the conversation, my video lasted all about 10 minutes before somebody decided. Yeah,
even these days.
Oh, absolutely. And for somebody with such little views as me, that was still enough to upset the algorithms and what have you. You know.
Right, yeah.
But please go ahead, Creda.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's headlines there today. Yeah,
right.
Our friend Fergal Bowers is
right.
saying there's cases going up and all this kind of.
Right.
But I mean, the positive thing is that I suppose anytime they rear their head with this kind of stuff, I mean, people just don't go in for it at all.
Right.
They get decimated in all the replies and the comments on social media. So
yeah.
I don't think they can get away with as much. I did notice. I don't know if you found this too with all the shenanigans there, just to bring things right up to date.
Right.
Especially with the passage of the
migration yes.
Opt-in. Now we've opted in. That as soon as the news drops that we've opted in or there's been a Dáil vote, they tend to jump the shark. So there's not even a report on RTE that this legislation has passed. They go straight to these stories about, like, let's say, I don't want to use trigger words, but let's say, threats against politicians, let's say. And then that becomes the story.
You mean the timing of it?
Yeah, I mean the timing of it.
Yes.
So there's no fallout or or accountability for the government to stand over why they voted a certain way. The story immediately moves to, we need more security for politicians. And none of these allegations have been substantiated because there was another bomb. There was another threat against the politician, Minister for Justice, a couple of months ago.
Right.
And nothing came of that. There was no prosecution, nobody charged. I mean, surely they have the means and the wherewithal to find out who's making these threats.
It's called intelligence, or is that an oxymoron?
Well, I sometimes struggle with the idea that these are a corrupt, contemptible shower of gombeans that don't know what they're doing, but they do seem very expert when it comes to selling out the country. I mean, that's where all their efforts seem to lie, and they're very good at that.
Well, I watched Primetime last night, and I think the Migration Pact only got about 2 minutes. Same thing with Virgin Media, their late night thing. Same thing, only about 2 minutes. Now, for something as important as this, I find extraordinary that, unless of course they're told not to cover it. Just put it in as an and finally bit.
Yeah. Well, all these kind of, you wonder, is there games be played insofar as you had this whole story dominate the last week about the lady down in Limerick that was beaten by the soldier.
Yes.
And I mean, that's occupied all the news on the run up to this.
Right.
And even after it now, and Arnie of Arnie, Sinn Féin are calling for more to be done to protect women, and they had, if you remember, Maria Cahill, and there's all sorts of allegations around Sinn Féin and the way they behaved. I mean, it's supremely ironic for them to come out about.
But if I may, Creda, you had a situation there too of a man who got a suspended sentence, who was somebody who came into Ireland. I think he was from Nepal, was it? And after 6 pints of beer, he was staying with a house with, I think the lady had multiple rooms let out. And he went into one girl room who promptly told him to get lost, and then he ended up going into his landlady's room, and I think she was 78 years old, and sexually assaulted her, and he got a suspended sentence,
I mean, there's two Judge Martin Nolan, or there's two Judge Nolans as well, and you have this guy who's retiring now, and
But surely that should
There's
be
the other Nolan, and he's the amount of times he's let.
right. But that should be a deportable offence, should it not?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and there has to be some sort of parameters around this. If you abuse the goodwill of the state, that it's not tolerated.
Yeah.
You know, and that lady actually said that she was never going to rent a room out again. So here's somebody whose life has been completely turned upside down by somebody, and gets a suspended sentence.
Yeah.
You know. But and also, if may, I actually got an email today from Richard Boyd Barrett, and it was a list of all those that voted yes and voted no. And the strange thing was that I don't know whether they actually had a mistake, but the names seemed to be all completely wrong. You know, they had Leo Varadkar down as voting against it, and Helen McEntee, you know, but yet on the same list was himself, Breed Smith, and a few others.
I wonder if that's an exercise as well, if they concoct a baloney list.
Right.
And then they flush that out, and
right.
then they see where that's coming out, and then they know who's putting out which list, and
right.
they can kind of trace things. I wonder if there's some shenanigans going on there, you know.
I just think we're not doing too good traffic wise. I might see if I can go back around and head down by the Dollar. That could be, I forgot that there's a concert on in Marley, so that might be holding up proceedings. I'll maybe nip out that way, you know.
So Kevin,
yes.
I've got a question for you,
yes.
if that's okay, because and probably a lot of people would know this, but I'm sure a lot of people don't. Is
right.
That you did record. You're the, I suppose, the content creator that snagged the audio. You asked the question, you got the audio of Simon Covey.
Yes.
And he blatantly and I suppose brazenly said that it is the ambition of the government. I mean, it was around the time of the Migration Pact and Ireland 2040 plan.
Yes.
And he had a very clear idea about where the demographics were going.
Yes.
And he made the assertion that the population would grow
by a million people,
and half of those would not be
from Ireland.
From Ireland.
And it would be a good thing for this country.
Yeah, and I suppose I mean that's an admission right there that I mean there is an agenda. I mean this I've noticed a lot of people and a lot of normies even to this day.
Yeah.
They will call you a conspiracy theorist if you say any of this to them, even though it's been mentioned multiple times by
yes.
Our Oireachtas committees. You've got Simon Covey, you had Peter Sutherland, of course. I mean, there's multiple citations you could point to, but they will say to you, "Oh, this is all a conspiracy theory."
Yeah.
And then when you have the exchange with them, then they turn around and they say, "But isn't it a good thing?"
Right.
Did you ever notice that?
Yeah. Well, my question would be, what are the benefits to mass inward migration? What are the actual benefits?
Yeah.
Especially with people that are undocumented. That's what I find is crazy. In fact, if I get a chance, just to tell the listeners here that both Creda and myself are heading out to listen to Matt Letizia. So if I get a chance to ask him a question, my question will be that with so many of these international protection sites, as my last interviewee, should I say, Peter, mentioned the security aspect of this, that you have 36, minimum of 36 in Dublin, and 293 based all around the country, that at what stage or as this has the potential to be a security risk to the stability of this country.
Exactly.
So that would be, if I get a chance to ask Matt, would be that question.
Yeah, and circling back to the story,
yes,
all last week was about a military-age male. Now, granted, he was Irish,
right?
But I mean, the whole premise that these men coming into the country pose a danger is partly because they are military-age men.
Correct.
I mean, you wouldn't mind so much if they were, let's say, women or children or elderly people, because those demographics don't really pose a threat to the security of people.
Yes, but as Peter rightly said, that there's three scenarios where you get large groups of men. One is a football match, the other is a prison, and the third is an army barracks. So it's I think it's very true. But so I suppose, if I may, Creda, what was your kind of light bulb moment into things that got your attention as that something wasn't quite right?
Oh, well, I suppose I've always kind of I was kind of distracted by a lot of kind of woo kind of stuff way back in the day.
Right.
I was kind of always kind of interested in kind of alternative theories about things. I didn't entertain them ever, but I kind of mused about them. And but I didn't really ever have any kind of wild kind of conspiratorial ideas about the way the world was or anything like that.
Yeah.
until after, I suppose, 9/11,
Yeah.
maybe.
That was my wake-up call as well.
And even a couple of years after that, I mean,
Yeah.
the whole 9/11 thing, washed over me at the time, and
Yeah.
prima facie, it did seem like what it was to my eyes. I remember watching it live. And
Me too.
And then I was over. I was working in a bar, and it was actually my manager turned around to me, and he was an artist.
Right.
Like he was an amazing artist. He was like a fine artist, and he he was drawing. He could draw anything. Like
Right.
he was one of these guys. He could draw. Any kind of scene or depiction of any kind of object, he could just draw it straight away. Like it's just amazing. But he kind of illustrated it for me. In a sense, a cartoon. When Roadrunner has been chased by Wile E. Coyote, and then he'll
Go off.
He'll paint an imaginary hole in a wall, and he'll run through it.
Right.
And then the coyote will go kind of splat up against the wall.
Yeah.
And he was kind of drawn this picture of the Pentagon and
Right.
The size of a jet, and
Right.
then you've got this kind of wall that seemed to collapse down on itself. And
Right.
he's like, where's the plane going into that hole?
Yeah.
So I suppose I kind of went, that's a bit off, and then I started looking into things a little bit, and then funny enough, I remember I must have come across the name Count Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi
Okay.
one time, and I remember I was having some friends over, and jokingly, because it had just come up in a whatever social media feed or something like that. And this is probably back in 2000 and maybe 2009, 2010.
Right.
And I said jokingly, I dropped in the name, and they all came around and they were like, oh, you're on this conspiracy theory buzz. And
Did they actually knew who he was?
Well, they must have looked him up on Wikipedia. Like, I hadn't even looked him up on Wikipedia. I just thought the name was funny, and I dropped it into a conversation and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then so I was kind of aware of these kind of things, but we hadn't begun to be steamrolled. I mean, we had a certain amount of immigration, especially after the Nice Treaty, and then after the Lisbon Treaty, there was more accession countries and whatnot. But it was kind of like most of those people that were coming over, they were coming over for a couple of years, generally because maybe the wages were better in Ireland, and there was a bit of a boom going on, and then they were bunking off back to their own country once they made a few bob, and there was a certain amount of acceptability about that. Like, people voted no to those referendums, but they had the referendum again, and we got a certain amount of guarantees and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then I mean, if it comes down to political legitimacy, well then there's an argument we were hoodwinked, but at the same time,
I think people were frightened.
We got some concessions, and those were supposed to be these guarantees that were supposed to afford us a say in these matters. But that's just all changed. I mean, it's gone up a gear. It went up a gear noticeably in, I think,
2015 onwards.
Yeah, well, really, and I do think it was around the time Sutherland was the UN migration chief, and he had some talks there. He was talking to some committees in the UK about.
Well, I saw that one actually, the House of Lords.
Yeah,
that used to be available on YouTube, and it's gone. You can't find it anywhere. Yeah. And he spoke about the hegemony of Europe, and basically to kill nationalism was to blend people together.
Yeah, hegemony, and that's Kalergi's plan.
Correct.
And I was looking a little bit into Kalergi. I found a couple of articles on him. And I mean, these are mainstream citations from the Council of Europe website, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they fully admit and freely admit that he was one of the architects of setting up all of this apparatus. Like the
pan-European movement in the 1920s.
When the left or these normies kind of throw back at you that this is all conspiracy waffle that people are imagining. Well, it's all there. I mean, it's not like there's still a BBC article up there, like you said. Sutherland is there. He said it's our ambition to undermine the homogeneity of European.
But what I found interesting, Creda, was the fact that something that was readily available, starts quietly being removed, and so I had to do a Freedom of Information request with the House of Lords by email to get a link to the actual, because I found the date, I think it's June 2012, I think around the 30th of June 2012, and so I was able to get the date from looking up newspapers, when it mentioned this, and then I was able to put in a freedom of information request, and the actual link to that speech arrived then. But it's amazing to think that you actually had to go to those kind of levels to kind of get that kind of information out, which was in a public platform.
Yeah.
But
as well, there's that interview as well from, there was, I can't remember his name, but he was representing Bono's
that's right, yeah.
charity
One society, one foundation.
And he was in the Dáil committee, and he was articulating how the Irish population will be eventually senescent, meaning that we're not going to be having children,
yes,
and that we need the vitality of all of these other peoples and countries to basically revitalise and change the demographics of the country. And so, like this game that people like to play, and especially the politicians in charge, that none of this is actually happening.
It's all spontaneous.
It's all and when it's clearly not true.
Correct.
And I've got maybe a couple of different ways of thinking about this, but there's a lot of people that don't like the idea, obviously, of losing your country to people that, by all rights, don't have any connection to the nation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are concerns around, crime and like you said, there's concerns around security and whatnot. But even on the premise that all of the people coming here, they all are amazing people.
Yeah.
And
doctors and engineers.
That still doesn't negate the fact that there's people in this country that need to be taken care of first, and it's our government's duty and obligation to take care of the country and people in this country first. There's people that need to be housed. Yeah. Their needs should be addressed.
Well, you have the situation too, Creda, if I may, that we give €1 billion in overseas aid.
2 billion now.
2 billion now. Okay, so surely that should include a returns policy that the governments that these people are coming from, that if they're not successful in their application, that their policy must include. She's a big smile on her face, isn't there? Shouldn't let her in. But sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But there should be a returns policy.
Like, if one of us wanted to go to Australia or Canada, we got to have a certain amount of money in the bank.
Yes.
We have to have like a return flight.
Correct.
And all this kind of jazz, and then you get a certain amount of a visa, and then once that's up, you're done, you're gone.
And then you have a situation as well with I heard the other day, I think it was Richard O'Donoghue who brought it up in the Dáil. You're welcome. And that he was saying about this person that their passport was stolen back in Spain, and it took them over 3 days for the authorities over here to get back to them. So yet they're having hundreds of people coming in a week undocumented, and yet when you have Irish abroad that are in trouble, they're nowhere to be seen.
I saw one of those videos on X or Twitter.
Yeah,
it was basically a video that was spliced in two when you had lads rocking into the country, setting up tents,
right,
being picked up on boats and dropped off, bussed in, and then the other frame in the video was people going through the airport screening and getting your passport checked, getting the additional security check and getting frisked, and all this kind of jazz. And the contrast, like between like you with your passport,
doing the right
with
thing.
Your ticket, probably evidence, like when you go to a hotel as well, like you have to present your passport,
right,
and you probably have to have paid for the hotel as well because they have your credit card details, like and that's the contrast, and like nobody's waiting there to give you a tent, or to give you a few quid as well, pocket money while you're over there, like
bigger money, but but that's I suppose at this stage now, like what are the solutions? How do we get out of this? What are their strategies of extracting? That even with the last elections, like.
Would you mind if I talk about Saints and Scholars a bit?
Oh, please do. Please do.
I suppose the reason it was myself and Bosco, I better give him a mention.
Yeah.
But
that's not the puppet now.
Not the puppet. Clarify. He might. There might have been a hand there at one stage, but I think he's all sorted now.
Right.
Anyhow, no, not the puppet, but he had an idea to kind of set up a podcast and whatnot, and then we kind of did a bit of a thing as well on social media, and we kind of ran with that for a while. And the idea was, look, there's lots of channels and accounts there that deal with politics, and I suppose we tried to take more of a I suppose, a wider view of everything that's
Right.
going on.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, we didn't want to be just another platform that talks about politics
Right.
in the political realm, because, personally, and I'm sure I can speak for Bosco here as well,
Yeah.
that we believe that fundamentally the ills of and all the effects that we're seeing right now is primarily due to spiritual deficit, or
Absolutely.
we're disconnected from our spiritual obligations and our spiritual connection to
We've lost touch with God. in other
to
words.
religion. I mean,
Yeah.
you had the 2000s mainly, where kind of atheism was really the predominant, I suppose, outlook on how the world was.
Yeah.
Religion kind of fell away to a large extent now. I think there's a bit more. Times have changed. I think when times are hard, it's a bit more easy not to be distracted by all of the material comforts.
Yeah.
And I think when Ireland went through the Celtic Tiger and whatnot, we became, I suppose, more affluent than
Yeah.
we had been in decades past. That it was much easier just to, put the feet up and to
What
become
they,
complacent.
what do they say about not serving two masters?
That's
Yeah.
it, as well. So
Yeah.
I think fundamentally we were kind of looking around, and I kind of grappled with my own kind of, I suppose, challenges around spirituality and religion.
Yeah.
And I was kind of thinking, how do I know what's true, which is the true religion, which isn't, and and even a lot of people are kind of caught in a question of, should I be spiritual, and that can mean anything, and then should I be religious, and that is a different connotation.
Yeah.
And whatnot. So I kind of did a bit of a deep dive, and I was baptized Roman Catholic, so I kind of, having been a lapsed Catholic, I suppose, and not really ever knowing the faith,
Yeah.
the Catholic faith, I said I better familiarise myself with it to at least see if it stands up, so
Yeah.
it stands up to other, I suppose, other religions that are out there that have such
Yeah.
claims. So, I mean, when you kind of delve into it and you kind of learn about, your history, and even recent history, with the men in 1916.
Yeah.
You learn a bit about the history. I mean, there's a lot written about that, and a lot of the men in 1916 were men of faith. Even James Connolly would have converted before he was executed.
Right.
So, I mean, I started investigating, and then you kind of go back into the 9 Years' War, the Confederate Wars, and all this kind of stuff. And throughout all, I suppose, the struggle for not just Irish independence, but I suppose the Irish nation, it's always been attached to our faith,
Yeah.
which is predominantly Christian and Catholic.
But that was, if I may, one of the things that struck me, say, during the COVID era, was that I remember talking to somebody one day, and they were saying that there was a sex shop open on Capel Street. You could go to a bookies, you could go to an off license, but the church were shut. The churches were shut. So you had a situation where vice was catered for, but not virtue.
Exactly.
And if I may, that the church, the fact that they allowed themselves to be relegated to a non-essential service. And to me, that when you wear a uniform, it doesn't necessarily have to be a military uniform, but you have the uniform of a doctor, a nurse, a policeman, and a priest. And sometimes, as a result of that uniform, it means that you put yourself in harm's way.
Yes.
That is your service, and for the public to have their back turned on them by men of the cloth, I found extraordinary. Even to the extent that you've got mass rocks up and down the country that could not people have organised those that wanted to celebrate the mass at these mass rocks, a reminder of what others had gone through to defend their faith, or even in public parks. You could still stand within your 6 foot, but to tell people to watch it on TV, and and I think in some ways, instead of it being a sacrament, it went from that to some sort of entertainment. But that was all. So I felt, and the other thing which I thought was quite surprising was that, why did Bishop Martin have a profile on the World Economic Forum? I would have thought that would be for political and commercial, and but
Yeah, economics, basically. I mean,
Exactly.
there's a whole history there. I mean, I don't know if we want to go into it, but there
Right.
was a cardinal, and he was a Brazilian cardinal.
Right.
And he was invited over by Klaus Schwab to the World Economic Forum. And, there's no, this is the thing about, I suppose, finding your faith in these times is it's a bit like running into a burning building, because the church is in a bad way. I mean, there is a lot of infiltration. There's a lot of corruption going on. I suppose there's a biblical maybe understanding of that.
Right.
Insofar as,
have you ever come across the Alta Vendetta?
Yeah, the Alta Vendetta. Yeah. That was the plot to destroy the church from within. And I mean that. I suppose
it was a 100-year plan. So you think like that was written in 1848, was it?
I think maybe even a little bit before, but I mean it's a long-term plan.
Yes.
And we're probably seeing a lot of the consequences of that in our time. But I mean, at the same time, once you kind of get an understanding of all of this, you shouldn't leave Jesus Christ for the sake of Judas.
Right.
So just because there's wicked men in the clergy,
you
shouldn't let that. I mean, if you have faith, you shouldn't be shaken by that. But it is wicked, and it is a terrible thing to befall us. But I mean, there are saintly people, I do believe, and it's up to us to be discerning and find out who those are and who the shepherds are that are speaking up and are
like Cardinal Vigano.
Well, I've got a lot of respect for Vigano. He's come out and he said a lot of things that nobody else would say. Yeah. And he was responsible for bringing down Cardinal McCarrick, who was a notorious abuser over in the US. Right. So we're in very strange times.
And worrying times.
Worrying times. Yeah. And it's I sympathise with people that might they might be disgusted by it all and they don't want any part of it. Yeah. But I mean I suppose. It's a much bigger conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation. Yeah. But I do think, at the moment, it's a bit of a chastisement as well, and it's a trial we're going through. And I think maybe the way things are going, COVID might have been just for starters.
Well, in a way, I think we kind of separated wheat from chaff, and I made more friends during COVID than I did beforehand, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And between those that I would regard people that I can depend on and those that I can't.
That's it. You know the score with people.
Yes.
On which
especially
side of the fence they fell and what they put as their priorities.
Yeah.
So.
Well, especially if I may, regarding say the soup, the recommended soup, and the fact that I'm coming across people on a weekly basis that are suffering from it, the side effects of it, and initially at the start I would suggest that some of them might not have been able to draw the dots, but I think now it's actually becoming quite evident, and you can see there what the governor of Arkansas has now taken a case against Pfizer for the fact that they were not safe or effective. And you also have the bit in the, do you remember it wasn't in the European Parliament where you had the head of the scientific department of Pfizer. I think your man Borla was supposed to attend, but he at the last minute was unavailable. But he had his head of the scientific department, and that fella from the Netherlands, was his name Roos, isn't it? He asked the head of science, were the soup tested to see that it would prevent person-to-person transmission? And she straight up said, no, we didn't have time for tests for that. So
warp speed.
Exactly, So when you have a situation like that where, and then also people losing their jobs, the threat of people who are now, unfortunately, are seeing the side effects of this as a result of pressure that was put on them by their work, and yet that would be in breach of the Nuremberg Code. 10 rulings of the Nuremberg Code include fully informed medical consent, not that governments cannot experiment on their own citizens, and that people cannot be coerced into taking a medical treatment that they don't want. So on 3 aspects of that,
Yeah, there's also a provision in the Irish Constitution that guarantees the right of bodily integrity.
Right.
And that was found in a case that we have inalienable rights to bodily integrity.
Right.
But it was actually the case was interesting insofar it was to do with water fluoridation.
Right.
And the plaintiff actually lost the case. She didn't want her water fluoridated, and the ruling was that because it was a public, so to speak, public good,
Right.
a common good.
Right. Creedy, would you do me a favour?
Sure.
Would you mind putting on your sat nav on your phone?
Sure.
Just to find the quickest route here, because this thing starts at 8 o'clock. Hopefully it won't run on time, but just to cut across you there and see what way would be better off going down Marion Avenue or on straight and down. Thanks. But so yeah.
Just to finish that is that.
So what was and she lost the case.
She lost the case, but despite that, the judgment found that there was, at a constitutional level,
Right.
natural law level, I
Okay.
suppose, the right to, and that was affirmed in the Irish Supreme Court, that
Right.
we have a right to body integrity.
Right.
So all of these kind of means and efforts of coercion to get everybody to take the soup.
Yeah.
It never really had any kind of firm basis in law what they were doing. But
Right.
I think it doesn't matter so much that they need to be. Nobody's going to really hold them to account. I mean, the situation is so bad now that a lot of the politicians will appoint judges. The political parties will appoint judges,
Right.
and then of course the judges are all probably party hacks as well, and
Yeah.
have their affiliations and this kind of thing. So they're
Yeah.
never going to turn around. I mean, it's unbelievable as well. Like the president, who was supposed to be a guardian of the Constitution, chose to disregard and all of this. And if it wasn't for the war in Ukraine,
Yeah.
I think it was looking like they were going to extend that lockdown further.
Right.
So
do you reckon these things are actually interconnected? There's something going on, isn't it? Because not everything seems to the timing of these things. Like you say, like
I do think that maybe the Ukraine thing took them by surprise insofar
Right.
as I don't think they can maintain, a narrative like that.
right
Because if you go back to Goebbels and his kind of
propaganda.
way of propagandizing, you tell a lie big enough, often enough.
Okay.
And I don't think once the Ukraine thing happened, they needed everybody to switch on to,
Right. Because
pro-Ukrainian position. So they couldn't really run two narratives at the same time. So that's why I think the COVID thing. That's really why I think it all kind of went down.
Well, you think at the time, Creda, we were in a situation where you had effectively a medical apartheid in this country. The segregation of people between those that took the soup and those that didn't. You couldn't get into bars, restaurants, and in some instances family homes. And yes, suddenly that ends, and you have people coming into the country that have the lowest vaccination rates in Europe, and that didn't seem to be a problem. So I found that quite extraordinary, how one suddenly slipped, finished, and the other ended started within less than, I think, a month, But, so, any look?
It'd be good if I could find the.
Have you got Google Maps?
Well, I'm trying to get the actual address. For
Oh,
this.
I know where it is. Just Dalkey Village.
Okay.
Thanks. But sure, I suppose we're probably about 10 minutes away anyway. Fingers crossed. Couldn't believe the amount of traffic that was up around. Just actually to go back a little, if I may, we were talking about before we started recording, talking about the Lisbon Treaty. You were going to mention about that. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on when Ireland signed up to the Lisbon Treaty.
Yeah, well, I suppose I was in college at the time when all that came to be, and all the debates and discussions started around that.
You can turn off our voice. Thanks. If Sean Connery wouldn't mind, but only joke. Yeah. Okay. That's grand. Thanks.
Yeah, the Lisbon Treaty. I suppose that was a bit of a watermark time as well, because I don't think obviously that referendum was run twice.
Right.
The first time it was defeated, and the establishment was disgusted.
Yeah.
And I suppose that was a snapshot as well of Irish people's thoughts on the way the world was going at the time, and where Ireland was going at the time, and they had their concerns and they expressed it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the reasons that were cited for the rejection of the Lisbon Treaty, it was neutrality was one of them. There was concern around abortion, that could be snuck in through the European Charter of Fundamental Rights.
Right.
There was also concerns around taxation, and there was concerns around immigration as well. And so we then ran the referendum the second time,
Yeah.
and it was all kind of threats made. I don't know if you remember,
Yeah.
even Intel at one stage were taking out billboards. They talk about political interference. I mean,
Right.
like, they give out about, a lot of people that are resettlement program now that the EU is proposing.
Right.
That's why we had the opt-out. And to see now that we basically, all the guarantees have been basically
Torn up.
but it's not necessarily the other European member states or the European Union bureaucrats that have torn them up. Like we have ourselves to blame. I suppose just to circle it back to we were talking about the levels of immigration coming into the country and whatnot.
Yeah.
And like migrants are self-interested. I kind of agree to an extent with some people on the left that it's not the migrants' fault. They're kind of just self-interested.
Right. The policies that
But
are
it's
there.
actually Irish people. If you look through all the names of the politicians in the Dáil,
Yeah.
like they're all Irish surnames. They're all from Irish families.
Yeah.
These people, and so I mean that bringing it back around then to the spirituality component. Like, I mean, that's why I think there's a huge problem going on, because we no longer seem to cohere as a people. We've got this dichotomy split now, almost like the foundation of the state, where you had treaty and anti-treaty factions of the Irish nation,
Right.
and now we've got this split between. I mean, I know there's some politicians there that are probably not terribly keen about what's happening, but the overwhelming majority of the politicians in the country have got a diametrically opposed view, I would say, to a large portion of the population,
Yeah.
and that population of the country has no representation at all. Really.
And yet you think that, we had an opportunity there with the last elections that I would have thought, certainly regarding some of the MEPs, the likes of Niall Boylan not getting in, and the fact that he was doing so bloody well. And there are other people here you have never heard about, well, they're within their 5 years, so they have actually been in Europe, and yet they get re-elected. So it does make you wonder that, something rotten with that.
Yeah, that's why I don't think politics is really going to solve this. Beg your pardon. Shouldn't have doxed you. That's why I don't think politics is going to solve this really.
Right.
Is because I can't see it changing, and some people, I think, intellectually you can't convince them.
Right.
So then you're going to have to fight them. And I'm not talking metaphorically fight them. I'm
Yeah.
not talking going out and having
Fraction fights.
big malaise,
Yeah.
on a cross street.
Yeah.
But in a way, that's where it could all lead to as well, because and that would be a desired outcome, I think, as well, because what better than
They call it
way
the UN.
to defeat a nation than to divide it and then
Yes.
rule.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think we have to be very careful about
How this gets played out.
how it all gets played out. But
Yeah.
I honestly don't think there is really a political solution to this. Maybe the political solution will be downstream, but I think the only way we're really going to get to people is on a level where and unfortunately it's gonna take sacrifice.
Right.
It's not going to be an easy road, and like people did suffer greatly, I think,
Yeah.
with the COVID situation, because families were torn asunder.
Yeah.
And it was a very bad time. But I think it's about having the fortitude and the staying power, to keep your head held high,
Yeah.
and then to set an example, and then despite it all, then hopefully you're going to have those convincing arguments. You're going to have a position that people are going to be willing to listen to when things do really get bad. And
Yeah.
The larger context of all of this is we probably are looking at a further conflict in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and things are very complacent at the moment, because if you cast your mind back to the Cuban Missile Crisis,
It's very similar.
I mean, but everybody was hiding under their beds. They were probably in the churches praying all the time for a good outcome.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, people are just they're watching the Euros. They're You know, they don't care what just happened in the Dáil the other night.
Yeah.
They've no kind of idea that there could be,
Well,
you know, 30,000 military-aged men floating into the country every year.
Yeah.
The demographics are radically changing. The
Yeah.
safety of their family is
Yeah.
put at risk.
Well, you
They've no conception about any of this.
But if you think, Creda, for me, that if you have somebody who buys the Irish Times every day and listens to RTE, and that's their only go-to port of call, like how blinkered is that in their information, access to information? I mean, that's extraordinary. And if I may, there's a kind of a funny thing there. But last week, my mum phoned me, and she told me, "Oh, you have to listen to classic hits. They're talking about people why they're getting the news from fake news, and you know, as she would call it." So I decided to ring in the program, knowing that she was listening, you know, which was kind of fun. But ultimately, or should I say, interestingly, there was a podcast of that put up there early this week, and I thankfully I had recorded it onto a phone, and didn't it turn out that the podcast was removed?
Right.
You know, so I brought up on that. I don't know whether it's me or whether the other people that were on the program, but I certainly brought up the whole concept of CO2 not being a pollutant, and the fact that I'd actually asked that question to Mr. Eamon Ryan when he was in the Dropping Well pub. He refused to answer my question. He babbled on about parts per million, but not about what percentage of the atmosphere is CO2 and how much of it is man-made. I also spoke about the cancelling of Dr. Jerry Waters, as to use his term, that he refused to put something in his arm. He refused to put something in other people's arms that he wouldn't put in his own, and he lost a 40-year medical practice. And also about the inaccuracies of the PCR test that was invented by Carrie Mullis, and the fact that his interviews have all been deleted other than having them on BitChute. You know, so that whatever was something, and possibly what others had said, was spicy enough to have the whole podcast removed, which I thought was quite, you know. But,
yeah, I think there's probably a lot of gatekeepers. I mean, I think, and even if they're not gatekeepers, I think even though they might be on the same page in certain things, you know, overall, I mean, they're still in kind of under the delusion of indifferentism as well.
Right.
And, you know, I don't think, like, we kind of need, you know, and it starts with us, we kind of need to try and become saintly people. And I know that might sound a bit funny, but
we have to be a positive truth.
It's a bit like Jordan Peterson. You know, clean your own room. But I mean, Jordan Peterson kind of, you know, his emphasis is like on a practical level.
Start with yourself.
But yeah, he's right in the sense to start with yourself. But like he's kind of bringing that to a material domain. But I'm talking about, you know, I'm not just me talking about it, but I think if you connect with your spirituality, and I, in a way, I don't like that word, but what I really mean is religion, and you know, you need to do your discerning, and I mean that will orientate your worldview, orientate you in the world,
right,
and ground you much more than cleaning your room. Cleaning your room, you know, that's a good thing to do, you know, as a matter of course, but you know, you need to kind of you know, work out a lot of things first, and then I think once we get virtuous people, then I think the culture will change. When the culture changes, hopefully we'll get some good politicians,
right,
and they'll have their heads screwed on, and then that's the way to change things. And in a way, it's a much longer process than just having you know, some sort of a revolution. But like, I mean, I don't think a revolution is going to sort out our problems either, because that's just going to, you know,
it kind of plays into the hand.
Split society down the middle, and in a way
but ultimately we need control of borders. They have to stop people with unknown origins coming into the country, from a safety point of view, even if over everything else. And that, you know, if you look what's happening in Sweden, sorry, Emmanuel, I have to mention the canary in the coal mine. He asked me not to, but I said okay. So that's especially a mention for Emmanuel there, one of my favourite friends, a wonderful artist. But if you keep with Sweden, how things have got so out of control out there, taking in 1.15 million people in a 10-year period, and to the extent now they've got over 60 no-go zones where the police effectively have to go in multiple vehicles. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why they never had a lockdown in Sweden, because they figured that, well, we run the risk of starting a low-grade civil war here. you know, with people that have hand grenades and other things. In fact, back in 2019, there was a hand grenade amnesty. Imagine that. Like, what is going on in the country where they have to decide, listen lads, we want you to put away the hand grenades, and we're asking you nicely, will you put away your hand grenades, please? You know, and also back
Yeah, but
to
even the liberal politicians now, I think in Sweden have
Yes.
kind of done away,
yes,
and now they're kind of putting their hands up. But like, I mean, it's a very easy thing to do to let all of these people in here, but
yes,
getting them out is another kettle of fish
Yes.
altogether. And I mean, I honestly I don't even know where you could start. I mean,
well, how about one appeal, maybe a second, and that's it. Not to have people appealing after appealing after appealing, and also the fact that you've got over 33,000 NGOs operating in Ireland, and they're getting over 6 billion in their taxes.
Yeah.
That's not good enough.
yeah, I mean,
You know?
if you add it up, it's probably, I'd say, between all the direct provision IPAS setup and all of the contracts that are issued to all these hotels, I'm not entirely sure. That must be running at close to $1 billion now, I'd say,
Yes.
at this stage. The international development.
What am I doing? I'm going the wrong way.
International development is probably running at about another 2 billion, and like you
Right.
said, the NGOs are running at about 6 billion. So we're probably
Yeah,
in for about 10 billion on all of this monarchy, you know.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I mean, it's is this why we're, you know, working our 9 to 5s and our, you know,
yeah.
I mean, is it
There has to be
is it
more
for this,
than
you know?
this. Exactly.
So things do have to change.
Yes.
I'd love to say there's a way to sort all of this out.
Yeah. There's the Queens. So I'm going to park in here. Well, thanks very much, Creda, for cruising with the count tonight.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And let's hope Matt has a couple of interesting words to say. You know. So, all right, from the count and Creda, good night, good luck, and God bless.
Take care.